Hey folks, good morning. I think we'll get started right about 10:30 now. So welcome to Walking Tours, where traditional and scientific knowledge meet. My name is Sydney Howlett, and I'm the engagement manager at GreenLearning. I'm joined also by Andriana Saluk, who is our program coordinator. She'll be monitoring the chat and answering questions. So I encourage you folks throughout the session to put into the chat, introduce yourself, what grade you teach, what subjects you teach, if you're looking to get anything specific out of this session. And I encourage you to use the chat throughout the entire session. I have a wealth of resources and experiences that I'm going to be pulling on. I'm a former Ontario teacher. I've taught English, core French, and French immersion from kindergarten, mostly to grade 8, but I do have experience up to working with post-secondary students. So please do add in the chat if you have additional resources. Links, comments to add, please do so. But if you could take a moment right now and just introduce yourselves in the chat so we can know who's in the room, and we can tailor the presentation a little bit more specifically to what you folks are interested in learning about. Awesome, and if you're just in for a bit, that's great. Welcome, it's nice to see you folks. Awesome. So while you folks put your information in the chat, I will just kind of get started here. So for those of you who are not familiar, we're from an organization called GreenLearning. And GreenLearning is a national not-for-profit organization that creates free online education programs about energy, climate change, and the green economy. Our mission is to engage and empower students to create a positive change in our evolving world. Now, before I jump into anything, I do want to let you know that we do have a digital handout for you folks. So if you would like to download this, you will not be able to edit this document, but Andriana is going to drop a link to this in the chat. You're welcome to download this either onto your own computer, into your own Google Drive. This is a resource for you to use. So it has a number of links that I'm going to be mentioning today. You're welcome, once you download this, to edit this document as you see fit. So if a resource really resonates with you, feel free to highlight it. If you want to add any notes, if something doesn't serve you, feel free to delete it. But I will be referencing all of the points throughout this document, throughout the presentation. So if you're someone who likes to follow along, you're welcome to do so there. Okay. So I like to begin all presentations with a land acknowledgement. As I mentioned, am tuning in from Ontario. I'm in Southern Ontario, and I am very grateful to work and live on the Haldimand Tract. So this is land, traditional land that was promised to the Haudenosaunee and Six Nations of the Grand River, and it's within the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee people. I'm going to show you a resource that I've linked on there called Native Land. The first thing with establishing a sense of place is really knowing what land you're on, who's taking care of this land for generations. This is a really great resource that you can use, where you can look at the territories, languages, and especially treaties, and you can look and see how they overlap. Now, this is a really interesting point of conversation for students to start talking about, why do these territories overlap? What do these treaties mean? And what does it mean for me to be living and working or going to school on these lands? So a really great resource that I recommend you go back to. So what are we here to learn today? So our learning goals for the day is that by the end of this session, I hope that you're able to follow a guided walking tour on Google Maps, that you're able to identify a range of free resources to establish Indigenous and scientific knowledge of place in your classroom, and that you feel comfortable creating an engaging walking tour on Google Maps with your students. So how this session is going to run is we're going to talk a little bit about knowledge. I'm going to take you on a showcase of a walking tour that a group of students from Manitoba created this past spring using a combination of different types of knowledge. I'm going to show you very briefly how to create a walking tour in Google Maps. We won't spend too much time on that, as I assume most of you would be familiar with that. I do have some instructions also linked in the digital handout. And then I'm going to be going through a number of free resources that's going to help you as geography and secondary teachers teach and establish this scientific knowledge, Indigenous knowledge, and a sense of place with your students, specifically relating to climate change. So I will also have time at the end for questions, but like I mentioned, if you have any questions or pieces to add throughout, please feel free to use the chat actively. So my first question for you folks, and I would love if we could actively use the chat here, is what is scientific knowledge? What comes to mind when you think scientific knowledge? Are there any terms, methodologies, communication methods that come to mind when you think scientific knowledge? So think of Western science in that context. What does that mean? So you're welcome to just throw those in the chat and I can read them out. So scientific knowledge. Inquiry, yeah, that's awesome. So usually with inquiry, you're developing some type of hypothesis that you want to test or explore. Data, that's a very interesting. What type of data is usually associated with Western scientific knowledge? Is it quantitative, qualitative? Usually quantitative, right? Ah, very good. It's objective. Now, if I was to flip this and ask you on the other hand, what do you think of when you think of Indigenous knowledge, or also known as traditional knowledge or traditional ecological knowledge? What comes to mind? Are we still looking at objective data? I love it. Oral history, the way that they present information or share information is different. What about gathering information? How is the way that they gather information different? You mentioned environmental data. That is often observational. There's hypothesis involved, generational, based on personal experience. Fantastic. I think everyone has a really great idea, and I love that word holistic. And I found a really awesome definition by none other than David Suzuki. So I'm going to read an excerpt from a blog that he wrote about Indigenous knowledge. And there's a line in this piece that really, really resonates with me that I think plays really well into our topic here. So I'm just going to read that for you folks. So in many ways, Indigenous knowledge is more encompassing and profound than science. It embraces gratitude, love, respect, and a deep sense of responsibility. Scientists scrub such emotions in the name of objectivity and try to find universal principles that can be replicated anywhere. Indigenous knowledge is the accumulated observations, trials and errors, successes and failures of people living in place. It's critical for people's survival and has been tested by their presence over thousands of years. So again, there's that generational piece. It's also deeply subjective and meaningful, considering the web of relationships in other animal and plant species, and air, water, soil, and sunlight. The element of reciprocity, of responsibility, is missing in contemporary science and society in general. And then this is the last line that really resonated with me. We need both science and Indigenous knowledge for a fuller understanding of our place in the world. Okay, I'm going to read that last line again. So we need both science and Indigenous knowledge for a fuller understanding of our place in this world. And that's really at the heart of what we're going to be talking about today, is how can we establish this sense of place by braiding these two types of knowledge, these two ways of knowing together to create a more holistic, full sense of understanding for our students? And how can we use that to better communicate the information that students learn in the classroom? So as I mentioned, I'm going to be taking you on a tour today. So this tour is actually the first place prize winning project, as I mentioned, of a group of students from Manitoba. This is a grade 8 class, and as I go through, I'm going to be talking a little bit about how we can gear this up for secondary students. This photo here is actually a art piece that one of the students created in relation to their walking tour. The link to the walking tour is on your digital handout. So if you are somebody who prefers to follow along, please open it up and you're welcome to do so. Otherwise, I will be reading out some information here for you. So I'm going to start with the introduction. So as you can see here, when you open up the map, it takes you directly into Manitoba. We are at West St. Paul School. So you can see that right on the map here. That is the school that the students were from. And you can see here on the left, all the stops along their walking tour. Now, unfortunately, just due to time, I won't be taking you through all of the stops. I've picked a couple that I think really showcase how these students have braided together this type of knowledge and how they've presented the information in a really engaging storytelling way. So the first thing I'm going to do is just read the introduction for you to give you a little about their project and how they came to developing this walking tour. So, A History of the Aki Center and what it's all about by grade 8 at West St. Paul School. Welcome to the Ozawashka Animike Benishki Aki Unji Kuniminaji Uni, the Blue Thunderbird Land-Based Teaching Learning Center, or the Aki Center for short. And one thing I will say, as you start weaving in Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous teachings into your learning practices, is making sure that you're putting in the effort to pronounce these words. Now, this is not something I knew how to pronounce and looked it up, and I have some cues here so that I'm, bringing in that traditional name for this location, because words are important, and you'll learn that as you go through and as you talk to more Indigenous peoples about their traditions, that acknowledging those names is an important first step. So throughout the winter and spring of 2021, our grade 8 class has been investigating water and ecosystems health, access to clean water, and the role that water plays in our lives as humans. We've learned about how water is life for so many reasons. Another topic has been how prehistoric times and the rise of civilizations, both good and the bad parts, have impacted where we are today. We were interested in how the land has changed so vastly over time, and here we are in 2021, making efforts to restore it as it could have been thousands of years ago. Sources such as teachings from Alex and Alexis at the Aki Center, and Waterlution, a national water organization. We've also become interested in how storytelling shapes how we relate to the land and each other. We honor that the Aki on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, Cree, Dakota, Dene, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We must honor our past and present to live in a better future. This is a tour of the Aki Center that looks at the special role of each of these places here has on our prairie ecosystem. Our learning looks at where we've come from and where we're going. There are 18 stops in total. We encourage you to spend time at each one or visit a few every time you come. Now, I will preface this by saying that this tour was designed to be done physically. So whether students physically print off the PDF that accompanies with this and do the walking tour, or take their cell phone and do the walking tour that way, this was not designed as a virtual tour. I'm going to give you some tips later on how you could make this a more engaging virtual tour. But for now, I'm going to jump into a couple of these stops. And so how this educator set this up is they actually assigned each student a location within the Aki Center and their school community in order to report on. And they were given freedom of how they talk about this location. So the first one I'm going to read out is called The Water Table by Sam K. So you can see it does highlight directly on the map where it is. If the Aki Center was closer to the road, we would be able to look on Google Maps and really see exactly what she's talking about. But since that's not a possibility, photos and videos are really helpful and can be uploaded directly to this stop on Google Maps. So I'm going to read this, and I want you to try and think as I'm reading it. Do you consider scientific knowledge? What pieces would you consider Indigenous knowledge? And where do you think those pieces came from? Okay. So right now, under where you are standing, below the grass, the soil, and the rock, is a body of water. That is called a water table. And it is part of many, many other bodies of water in something called a watershed. No, watersheds are not little sheds that have bodies of water. They are a system that connects mountains to creeks, to rivers, lakes, ponds, and eventually the ocean. In fact, watersheds are everywhere, and they are huge. Can you guess how big the watershed is that you're standing on? It's over 1 million kilometers squared, and it covers many provinces and even states. So what do watersheds do? Well, it funnels water underground called aquifers. and overground through rivers and creeks and all the way to one big collection area. You are standing on the Lake Winnipeg watershed. Our ending point of our watershed is Lake Winnipeg, just an hour's drive north of here. If you were to head up there now, how long would it take for the water from the Red River down the road to meet up with you? So again, this is very specific to their place. Watersheds are so big that a lot of water comes from glaciers and snow on mountains. Once water gets into the ground from these, the water table begins to rise. And once it gets to ground level, it turns into streams, rivers, ponds, or lakes, where it is one of the areas to access water. A flood is usually because there has been too much precipitation or snow melt, and the water table can hold it all. So the water has nowhere to go. Some people in history and even today can't access surface water, or it may not be safe to drink, so they've created wells. Wells are dug all the way underground until they hit the water table. This way, people can access clean water if they aren't by a body of water. Wells were invented around 7,000 to 10,000 BC and are still used today. Water tables are the very top layer of water on the watershed. Can you guess what percentage of usable fresh water comes from water tables and watersheds? Around 95% of our water comes from water tables. So what we do with the land, good or bad, is important. Water tables and watersheds are so very important because they are the main way humans get fresh, clean water for our personal use. For example, if someone in North Dakota, our closest American neighbor, were to dump a pollutant in the waters, then this pollutant could eventually get into our water. That is why everyone needs to be careful what they do with the water, because it could affect many people, animals, and places. So you can see the sense of responsibility and reciprocity for the land is very evident throughout this description of this spot, but the student still does also pull on a lot of quantitative facts, such as 95% of our water. So you can see how the two weave together to create a really holistic view of this landscape. The next one I'm going to read out is actually the next stop on the tour, called the Tall Grass Prairie Restoration Area. And this one is written in the form of a story. And this story was created by weaving together different stories that the student had heard, different learnings that they had done both inside and outside the classroom. And especially, you will notice that there are some pieces of this that will only be evident to students who have physically visited these places, such as sights and smells. Okay? So you're looking at the Tall Grass Prairie Restoration. It is here to return this land and ecosystem back to what it was 10,000 years ago. This is a fictional story inspired by the prairie landscape and stories. Today is the day that I can no longer be called Janice of the Prairies. I have called the prairie home for 40 years as I have cared and restored the grasses before you, but it is now the time to pass this responsibility on to my son, who I know will care for it too. My time is coming to an end, and while a part of me is ready, there is one more thing left to do. I get dressed as usual and get in the car. I drive, and as I arrive at the tall grass, a tear slowly drops down my eye to my cheek. I wipe it away, and as I know it will continue to be taken care of by my son, and hopefully generations to come. I get out of the car, and he is not here yet, so I decide to take a stroll for one last time. Before me is the Model Prairie Restoration, a place that I was part of revitalizing 40 years ago. It took a lot of patience, love, and many hours of observation. The grass is tall and gray-greenish color that you can see for miles. The smell of a mix between fresh soap and buttered popcorn floods my nose. As I walk around, I look to my left and I see a family of burrow owls chatting, or rather loudly chirping with songbirds. I make sure to stay on the path as I don't want to step on any native plants or insects. I decide to sit down on the path, but be careful as I see a hole. A butterfly lands on me, and for a moment all is good, until to my surprise, a long-tailed weasel swiftly jumps out of said hole, but runs off. I jolt for a second, making the butterfly fly away. As I am about to get up, I spot a purple aster, my favorite flower, on the ground. I decide to pick it up and put it in my hair and walk off. As I get back to the car, I see him leaning on it. "Hey, Mom, you ready?" he sighs with a sympathetic look on his face. "No, but let's go anyway, Mom." I declare as I started walking towards the tall grass. I get a whiff of that smell again, and a smile takes over my face. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" he exclaims in a calm way. "Like I said, I know you will take care of it." My lips start shaking as I talk, and my smile turns into a frown. He pulls me in to hug me, and he starts to whisper, "The kids love it here. They will always want to lend a helping hand." He's taller than me now. He's grown just as tall as the grasses have. Okay, I pull myself out of his hug and start walking towards the prairie once again. But this time, I keep going. I explain the duties and schedule to revitalize the prairie as I have shown him the different plants. Animals run by to greet us, and I tell him about everything. Don't forget to burn it every 3 to 5 years or when it gets too thick for the prairie, and you need to mow and trim, cut back all those invasive species. We don't want that thistle around here. He cuts me off as per usual. Mom, I've got this. Don't worry. I know the seeds can last for 10 to 15 years in the soil without spreading. I know to cut the weeds right as they are blooming. I know to respect the land, the water, the air, as it is living too. I know everything. We get back to the car and I drive off, and for the first time, I feel free. Free to finish this life without worrying about the prairie, free to relax, free to live, and free to die. So you can see how the student has taken this knowledge about prairie restoration and they've weaved it into a story and put meaning to it. I love how they also mention that land, water, and air is living too. So you can see how all of these pieces fit together and how these students were able to not only better understand their physical landscape, but they were able to develop a sense of connection, a sense of responsibility to their place by these learnings that they did at the Aki Center, in their classroom, and physically at these places. So before I get into some of the resources that you can use in order to build this sense of knowledge with your students, both Indigenous and scientific, I'm going to briefly just show you how you can create this map on your own. Like I said, I'm going to be very quick with this. So here I am logged into Google Maps. So I'm logged into my Google account as you see here, or else you will not be able to save your map. So I head to the top left corner and I'm going to just create a new map. The process is fairly simple and I guarantee your students would have no problem doing this completely on their own. So from here, I'm actually going to type in West St. Paul School. You would obviously put in your school. Here we go. It's going to zoom me in. So here I can start adding different plots to my map. And this is where I really think that you can gear this up. So those students did a written piece. You are not limited by writing. You can add photos, videos, artwork, articles that relate to that spot. You can add photos and images here by going to your Google Drive. You can upload directly from your computer. You can color code different things. So one of the best things about Indigenous knowledge is that it is holistic, that it looks at different factors and how they interrelate. And so being able to color code different layers can really help identify different connections for your students. So maybe one layer has all to do with water and another has all to do with trees or physical landscapes or even flooding infrastructure relating to that water and how those things interconnect. You can also change the base map here. So you saw in the example, they had a satellite view. It really depends on obviously the topic or the goal of your map. So like I said, I'm not going to talk too much about that, but I'm really going to get into some free resources now. And so these resources are all available from greenlearning.ca. So if you head over to greenlearning.ca, and again, all these links are in your digital handout, you'll see that we have a wealth of resources. We have over 200 resources that you can choose from, all free. They are password protected. And so in order to access these resources, you do need to give your name and email. Students do not need an access or a login code at all. Anything that students would use is open access. You can send them an open link for that. Excuse me. We do have a number of programs and then some separate resources. So I'm just going to head over to the programs tab at the top here. So all of our programs are inquiry-based, they are reviewed by teachers, and we are constantly getting feedback and updating them as well. Now, the first program I'd like to show you is our Flood Ed program. This program is all about extreme weather and preparing students for flooding. So building flood resiliency. And so as I mentioned, the walking tour that I just showed was challenge. That was a challenge, the Flood Ed challenge, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a second, but you'll see throughout these activities how these students were able to develop this knowledge and build this walking tour from these resources. So all of our programs have curriculum connections. So depending on what province you're in, you can download this resource and see exactly where this fits into your curriculum, program objectives, and then we always have additional resources. Sometimes these are backgrounders, photo galleries, key terms, anything that you need to deliver this information. Like I mentioned, I'm going to get into the challenge a little bit later. This program has 3 different modules. So we have learning about flooding and flood resilience. We have planning for flood resilience at your school. And then we have taking action to combat flooding. Now, these programs are designed to be a cohesive unit, but they are also designed to be taken independently. So if you only need 1 or 2 lessons to complete your learning plan, this program is flexible and can definitely do that. I'm only going to highlight a couple of activities in each of the programs today, but if you do have more questions about the programs, I encourage you to drop them in the chat. If you have other resources that can build upon these, again, use the chat so that way we can build on each other's knowledge. So the first activity I'm going to show you is what are floodplains and watersheds. So as I mentioned, the one student talked about the water table. What does that mean? How do we get to that learning? So as you can see here, I can't see any of the activity yet. You do have to log in. So in order to view this activity, we're going to hit view activity. If you haven't registered for an account, your name and email is all that you need for a quick free account. And then it's going to give me all the information I need for this activity. Okay, so there are lots of resources within this system. So I have curriculum specific to the activity, materials needed, estimated for the activity. Who likes to have your lessons plans in PDF format, or you're printing this off for a supply teacher, you would download the activity here. Or new to talking about floodplains and watersheds and you want some more background information, or you want a student-friendly version of information that you can pass along, you can also download this flooded backgrounder and give it right to your students. Of course, there are assessment tools within there, and we have handouts. So any handouts that are associated with this will also be listed here. If you're running this lesson and you want to run right within our system, you can do that as well. So by clicking on the first part of this activity, it's going to take me into the learning management software. So this activity introduces things with a backgrounder and videos. So there are lots of options within the program of what you show. So you can see this video here is geared for a little bit of an older audience, whereas the second suggested video is geared for a much lower audience. So there are scalability. You can be flexible with how you approach these, and by no means do you need to use all of the videos or articles that are listed in an activity. What I really love about this program is that once you get to discussion pieces, you can actually make notes right within here. So not only will the system track exactly where you are within a lesson, but if you want to highlight really important information, you can highlight right directly within this system. If you want to make notes on maybe something really important a student said, you can put it right within this system, which is really fantastic. One thing I love about this activity is that it's really hands-on. So students can actually build their own watershed, floodplain, and really get to know and understand flooding infrastructure and how this works and how landscape plays a role in that. All of our activities within the Flood Ed program are specific to place. So we're not talking about just any watershed. We're talking about where your school is located on a watershed, where your home is located on a watershed. So the handout for this is specific to your location. We give you all the resources and background information you need to go through this learning with your students. Now I'm going to go back to the main activity page and back to the main program page. And I'm doing this just so that you can see exactly how this functions, so that when it's time for you to go and navigate this program, you have absolutely no problems. The next activity that I want to show you that is very pertinent to geography teachers is the flooding mapping tour. And I'm not going to show you this activity. I'm actually going to show you the resource that's associated with it, which is our photo gallery. So in this activity, students are actually mapping flooding infrastructure in their community. What is flooding infrastructure? Well, that's culverts, swales, downspouts, anything that's designed to help mitigate extreme weather. And so what this activity does is students are physically going around their community. It can also be done on Google Maps with the satellite view, and they're plotting all of these different pieces. only one piece of the puzzle here of the flooding infrastructure. There are a bunch of other pieces, and this is where everything becomes interconnected, that you can add to this map that'll give you different information about how things are connected. So if you were to go through, build your flooding infrastructure map, and then you were to head back and you wanted to give more meaning to that information, I would highly recommend, one of my favorite activities in this program is the runoff footprint. So now we're looking at the permeability of the ground and how that relates to the flooding infrastructure. So you look at your runoff footprint, and maybe you've established that there is a huge area in your schoolyard that is all asphalt, that is non-permeable surface, that rain has nowhere to go. Then you can look at your flooding infrastructure map, and you can see, are there any, is there any infrastructure there in order to support this? Is there any infrastructure that we need in order to support this? Are there areas of high ponding or to be addressed? So there are lots of different questions in areas that you can take these maps, and I really encourage you to let your students lead. Again, everything is very place-based, so this runoff footprint is specific to your location. So you're not just calculating runoff footprint for any area, you're calculating it for your specific place. Now, there are lots of activities in here. When I wish I had time to go through them all, unfortunately, I don't. So I'm going to keep going and talk about flood resilience planning. So the challenge of this program, and all of our programs I'm going to talk about today, have a challenge component. And I like to look at the challenges as culminating tasks where students put all the learning from the unit, all the skills that they've acquired, and they put that into real environmental action. In this program, that action is making your school more resilient to flooding. So maybe you've looked at the permeability. There's a lot of ponding going on your asphalt. Something needs to happen. Maybe that water needs to be diverted somewhere. Maybe there needs to be more drainage, or maybe you need to look at more permeable surfaces. What kind of can your school come up with in order to help make your school more resilient to that flooding? Part of the challenge as well is to take action. So yes, we're planning for action, but we also want to take action. We want to empower our students and know that they can make a difference. One of my favorite activities in the Take Action module is to adopt a drain. And this is really relevant to geography as well, that you can also map. So in your community, do you have any idea where your drain leads to? Does it have any filtration before it gets to a body of water? What sources are pooling into there? There are lots of questions that students can start to ask and answer, and then take responsibility for that drain. Responsibility for educating others. Where does that drain lead? What should be going down the drain, and what especially shouldn't be going down the drain? Also take responsibility for keeping that drain clean. Maybe it's once a month or once a semester that you visit that drain, clear out any debris, whether that be natural or synthetic. Make sure it's free of anything that's going to block it, and continue to educate your community. Now, there are lots of different take action activities that you can do within here that will match with what's going on at your school. Because you can see exactly where it goes. I'm going to head over to our Decoding Carbon program. Now, this program is specific to secondary, so it is designed for grades 9 to 12, and it's all about climate policy. So again, you have your program objectives, curriculum connections, topics. There is a challenge associated with this, which I will get to in a minute. This program has 5 different modules, and I love the modules in this program because they can be used outside of the context of talking about climate policy. So if you are just introducing climate change to your students, and this is a fairly new concept for them, and you want to give them some really foundational background knowledge, this entire module right here, these 3 lessons, are a great place to start. The evolution of climate science can really get you an understanding of how Western science came to be, where we started from, why we track the way that we do, and how we plan to track in the future. The activity that I would recommend for this is actually how is climate change shaping this world? So this actually takes both a global, national, and then local perspective on climate change. So we're looking at how does regions, or where you're located, how does your place impact how you feel about climate change, how you're impacted by climate change, what pieces of the puzzle impact you and are relevant to you. So I would highly recommend this activity, but they're all fantastic. There are lots of activities in this program. Again, I don't have time to go through all of them, especially with the federal election coming up. If you want to talk to your students about policy, particularly relating to the climate or energy, I would highly recommend this entire module. We've had educators do this entire program from start to finish, completely online. It's a very flexible program and has a lot of simulators in it and a lot of digital tools that are very engaging for students. The next activity that I wanted to highlight here is climate change policy and Indigenous relations. So this activity was actually designed in collaboration with Indigenous youth. And this is where we're actually looking at policy from the perspective of Indigenous peoples. So looking at the mind, spirit, and emotion, and connecting that to policy. Right? So there we're bringing in a lot of Indigenous knowledge. And if you have the opportunity to bring in a guest speaker, an elder, or somebody from maybe a local reservation to talk to this a little more, I would highly recommend that. But we do give you the resources and tools that you need to do that on your own within your classroom. Building on that, we have a new module called Spark Climate Conversations. And I'm going to open this one up because I really love the visuals in this activity, where they're actually cards. So they're cards that you can print off and that are meant to start conversations with your students. And they pull from a range of different knowledge sources, which is something really, really exciting. So again, I'm going to open up the printable card set. And I believe we do have a black and white version of this card set, but this one is very colorful and beautiful. I apologize, my internet is a little bit slow here. There we go. So this follows a inquiry method. So we're looking at sparking interest in our students, getting them to start asking questions, making hypotheses, exploring, analyzing, and then acting on everything that they've learned. I'm just going to scroll down a second here so you can see exactly what I'm talking about by different types of data. So here we have a documentary. So here we're looking at stories directly from people. Data. Okay, so there are two different kinds of knowledge being put together, used side by side. Throughout this, we bounce back and forth. We pull on different sources. You can pull just one conversation, one pieces of data, just one of these videos, and have an entire conversation with your students. You can divide these up. This is a really, really flexible tool to get your students talking, to get them thinking, and particularly thinking about how climate change negatively impacts Indigenous peoples more than others. Okay, so why are they more negatively impacted by climate change than everyone else? Okay. So that was our Decoding Carbon program. And within the Decoding Carbon program, again, we have a challenge. And the challenge is to create a climate policy for Canada. And I was really impressed with the challenge submissions from this past year because so many students took different approaches to it. So we had some students, and I'm just going to head over to the showcase page. Again, I'm showing you exactly how to navigate this. So here you can go to the Decoding Carbon Challenge. And I do highly recommend that you register for these challenges. By registering, you get all kinds of additional information. We send you monthly newsletters with different resources that you can pull on. I'll be there to support you as well. And there are challenge prizes. So the challenge is to create a climate policy for Canada. And this past year, we had students who used the climate policy simulator in order to come up with some really statistical information about what policies would get us to our Paris climate agreement target. So you can see that they use the policy. They've been very used a lot of Western scientific knowledge in order to establish this policy. The winner of this challenge for this past year took a bit of a different approach where they actually wrote out a policy. So they didn't worry about stats or figures or anything like that. They talked with folks in their local community, and they came up with two things that need to happen in order to achieve our goals. First, we need to ensure that any newly proposed development projects are informed by a diverse community of voices, including Indigenous peoples and youth. Second, the policy mandates that for every new square meter of land developed, another square meter of land must be restored. So you can see how students can take different approaches depending on what type of knowledge they're exposed to. This student as well did pull on a lot of scientific knowledge in order to back up and support her ideas. So this is a really great initiative if you're looking at geography and restoring or protecting land, especially in the context of policy. I highly recommend this activity. You can even have your students present their policies or ideas to representatives of the government, especially now as the election's coming up. They're going to be listening for those youth voices and what people have to hear. Okay, so I'm going to continue on to another program. So this is our newest program called Eco 360, Transitioning to a Circular Economy. And this program, the first module is all about plastic waste. So again, curriculum connections, everything that you need is right within the program. This program has a lot of activities, a lot of really heavy chemistry and science focus within this. So I'm just going to highlight again a couple of activities that I think are really relevant for this. The first is plastics in the environment. So this looks at plastic waste, what impact it has on our land, on our water, and how water gets into those, and how plastic gets into those systems. And so this is really important and almost circles right back to that adopt a drain activity I was talking about, where okay, so if I had 3 bottles of water, one of them ends up being recycled, one of them ends up in a landfill, how does the other one end up in our bodies of water? And that's really where everything comes back together, and there's a full circle holistic view at land and our interaction with it. And I think this activity does a really fantastic job of highlighting that. Another activity, talk about so many of these activities. I just love this program. And then I really briefly want to mention is, what is your plastic consumption footprint? Because this is something that you can do passively throughout the semester. So this actually asks students to track their plastic usage. So at first they're just tracking, and then after a while they become more aware and more conscious of the choices that they're making that involve plastic. So I just really wanted to highlight this one. There's lots of learning within this program. But the last activity in this program I want to mention is called Reimagining Economy Using Biomimicry. So again, we're looking to nature for these solutions, which is something Indigenous peoples have been doing for generations and generations. So this activity, you introduce biomimicry to your students, what it is, how maybe some examples of solutions that we've taken from the environment. For example, wind turbines were designed based on the fins of whales. So that's a really cool design piece that we took from nature, because they are the perfect circular system. So there's just so much that we can take from there, getting your students outside to actually observe nature and think about it in this context. So again, if you can bring in, I guess, speakers, really important to get your students outside and actually experiencing nature. It's not enough to just put on a nature video and say, what kind of inspiration can you pull from here? It's really important to get students outside. So again, there's a challenge associated with this program, and it's an innovation challenge. So this challenge asks students to come up with a product, a service, a business, whatever it may be, that involves a circular economic model with the goal of eliminating plastic waste from the environment. Okay, so this could be something to do with maybe stopping the flow of plastic into the ocean. There are so many possibilities with this challenge. And again, the prizes are the same. So first place prize, $1,000, second, $500, third place is $250. And all the prizes, or all the challenges, are free to participate in. You get complete support in completing the challenges. You get feedback from judges. Students get really validated and really knowing that they can make a difference and that their ideas are being heard. So I just heard that there's a question in the chat about some challenges. So I think these challenges would really engage my students. That's awesome. Can they submit their challenges in French? You work for a Francophone school. I love this question, and I want to apologize. As a former French teacher, I understand the frustration with this. French folks are more than welcome to participate in the challenges, but unfortunately, just due to our capacity and the capacity of our judges, all the entry forms do need to be in English. If you have supporting materials that are in French, we did accept this past year, but the main bulk of the project was done in English. So if there's a way, maybe in your English class, that's how some other Francophone schools got around it, where they did the write-up or the actual submission piece in their English class, whereas all the thinking, all the learning was done in French. Some of our resources are in French. I will say that they are limited, and that's something that we are definitely working on. So we love to hear that that's a need, but unfortunately, we can't accept them in French just due to capacity. So I'm going to move on. I have one more program and one more resource that I'd like to highlight for you folks today before I open it up for some more questions. So this is our Energy Revealed program. So this is all about making energy visible to students. And you might be thinking, okay, energy, geography, what's the connection here? Now, this activity, and I'm in the old website. And so we actually have a brand new website for this program, which I'm just going to flip over to right now. So this program has a wealth of lessons, of modules, of all different things that you can do. And it does have two different streams. So if you're looking at this program and you're a secondary instructor, make sure that you're selecting the senior or senior. That's going to be the secondary stream for you folks, so grade 9 to 12. So the first activity I want to highlight in this series is actually a community. And it's a community energy walk. So we're looking at where is energy in our community? Where do you see energy? Where is energy being used and consumed? And students are plotting that on a graph. And what relation does that have? You know, where's the source of energy? How far does it need to be transported in order to be used? There are so many questions that students can then overlay with other information in order to get a better, more holistic understanding of their place. Now, my favorite activity in this program is by far Speak for the Trees. And I'm just going to scroll all the way down to the bottom. As I mentioned, there are so many activities in this program because this is one of my favorite activities, and it relates so well, connecting energy use to the physical landscape and the physical environment. And what this does is we actually use our energy calculator. And so I'm just going to head over to the energy calculator right now, and I'm going to use the Alberta Energy Calculator. So I know we have folks from all across Canada here today and maybe even some international. Currently, we have an Alberta-specific and an Ontario-specific calculator. We are working on a national calculator, so that will be coming soon. And this is just different because of where we source our energy from. So, you know, Alberta is very heavy in gas and oil. Ontario, we source our energy mostly through hydroelectricity. So those factors really play a role. Again, I apologize. You can see here I have a lot of tabs open and my internet is being quite slow. But essentially what this calculator does is you can input the information of the watts of a device. So I love to use the example of a blow dryer. So I have curly hair and I love to blow dry my hair. And my blow dryer takes about 1,200 watts. And if you know the watts of a device and how many minutes a day you use it, which is about 10 minutes for me a day, the calculator will actually tell you how many kilowatt hours a year your energy using that device uses, how many kilograms of greenhouse gases that's emitting into the atmosphere, and the cost specific to your region. So again, this is place specific. And where it becomes really interesting is, and I apologize that this is not loading. I'm just going to try and load that one more time. So for example, my blow dryer uses about 60 kilograms of greenhouse gases if I was in Alberta. 60 kilograms of greenhouse gases emitted by using my 1,200 watt blow dryer for 10 minutes a day. Now, how that relates to the trees is that it takes a tree a tree can absorb an average of 21 kilograms of CO2 per year. So it would take, on average, about 3 trees a full year to offset the emissions of my blow dryer use. So that puts it into really tangible terms for students. And I apologize again that the calculator is not loading. I really wish I could show you this, but I would encourage you to check out this calculator. They can be used with the activities, separate of the activities, but I find it really makes that connection for students, and they can start thinking about their energy use in terms of the environment. Now, the last resource that I want to show you today, before I open it up for some questions and resource sharing, is actually a children's book called Selah in the Land. Now, I know we're secondary educators here, and I'm not recommending this book as a read aloud. I'm recommending this book as an inspiration. So this book was actually written, and it's all about exploring environmental stewardship through Indigenous teachings. This book was written by 3 Indigenous youth in high school. And it tells the story of Selah, the main character, walking through and learning from the land, learning different teachings. And it's taken from 3 different Indigenous groups, 3 different women. And it's also illustrated by an Indigenous artist. And where I would use this in my classroom is showing your students what youth can do. This is a book that is published. You can buy it on Amazon and soon to be on our website as well, that you can show your students and show them exactly the power that they have. If you want them to culminate their learning into a story, whether that be a story that's involved in a walking tour or just a story, this is a great source of inspiration to show that you don't need to be writing for high school students. Your high school students can write for lower grades as well, which is a great way to empower students and give them a sense of meaning, because they can actually read those books to younger students and relay those stories to younger students. I also love that it incorporates art into this. Art is a really big piece and something that we can use to engage our students on. There is one highlight in this that relates to this book that is suitable for high school students. So it's designed for the kind of intermediate level, so 7, 8, 9. And it's the impacts of climate change on maple trees. And it's looking at how the different types of soil and the movement caused by climate change, so that trees can live in a climate that's suitable for them, how that's impacting maple trees, and in turn, the maple syrup industry here in Canada. And we actually have a full maple syrup inquiry that you can do with your students talking about this, but I think this is a really great introductory lesson or activity that your students can go based off of. There are some great articles in here that your students can read to really get a sense of how climate change is really going to be in the physical landscape of Canada and how it's going to impact industry and all the interconnectedness of all of that. So that is the bulk of our presentation here. I will open it up for questions, and I will recommend again that you head over to our website, that you create a free login to access all of these resources. I should mention that the energy calculator can be accessed by students without any login, so there are features that students can interact with on our website, including other simulators. We do have a ton more programs as well, and I wish I had time to go through them all today with you. My role as the engagement manager is really to support educators such as yourselves in completing these challenges and incorporating these resources into your classroom. So whether you're ready to take the plunge and you want to start with a full unit that we have pre-made for you that includes everything from backgrounders to assessment tools, I can support you in doing that. If you're looking for just to incorporate lessons into your existing learning plan, I'm happy to talk with you about adapting any of our lessons to the specific needs of your students and of your location. I also send out regular newsletters with additional resources, new articles that are coming out to keep relevant and up to date with what's happening around the world. And so now I'll invite you folks to, if you have any questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat or in the Q&A function. If you want to take this time, some of the questions, I am available here. I appreciate you taking time to come to our session today and learn about some of our resources and how you can weave together Indigenous and scientific knowledge to create an engaging walking tour or to facilitate storytelling within your classroom. If you have any feedback for us, we also love to hear that as well. Again, if you want to contact me anytime, my name and email is on that digital handout that Andriana dropped in the chat. I'd love to hear from you if you decide to use any of these resources or how you use them in your classroom. to showcase what other teachers are doing to help inspire you and give you ideas. So thank you again for coming. We have about 7 minutes left for questions, discussion. If you have any other resources you'd like to share, feel free to put those in the chat as well. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming.